questions about this, because at first I really didn't want to do it. I wanted somebody else from the Quaker meeting to do it, and some people said, "Oh, just get over it and do it." So I asked myself, from what Louise proposed, what is the spiritual grounding of social action? And I thought, well, a lot of people don't think of themselves as spiritual. And this morning I came across a very interesting quotation, what I would like to use as an answer to that "I'm not spiritual" complaint, from an American artist named Quang Ho. And he said, being spiritual simply means being willing to look into the nature of life, to ask questions and to wonder and to listen. And it also means seeing art everywhere. And really, I think that really answers what spiritual it is. It isn't going into one of these buildings, not to denigrate either of the spiritual homes on either side of us, which have wonderful traditions and are being very nice to us here, but also because people have very narrowly defined what being spiritual means, and that isn't what it means to me. They don't have a credo. Quakers don't have a credo, relating a little bit to Louise's question. But we do believe in some very important things, and I'll get to those in a minute. The second thing that I thought people might object to is spiritual is often looked upon as the opposite of rational. That science and faith are often divided and seen as incompatible, but I don't believe they are. And again this morning, Grace, whatever it was, it's always there, as Albert said. We're not waiting for gifts. The gifts are there to find. I found a little quote by Albert Einstein. And it is, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." In other words, we honor the rational, the scientific, but we have forgotten the intuitive gift. And spirituality is intuition. It isn't something that we can define as it's in my knee, it's in my heart, it's in this ear. It's not physical. And lastly, we're talking about social change. And I picked one of my favorite Quakers, whose name many of you might know, Lucretia Mott, who was a leader in the abolitionist and women's rights movements in the 19th century, and was very active in this area, in fact. And she said, and I think this is something very important for the Occupy movement, any great change must expect opposition because it shakes the very foundation of privilege. It shakes the very foundation of privilege. And that's what I see is the primary importance of the Occupy movement. Movement is shaking the foundations of privilege. And that is something that is a strong part of our tradition. We were much wilder when we first started. You think of us as being the Quaker Oats people, whereas we have nothing to do with Quaker Oats. We have never, and have often had issues with the way Quaker Oats presents Quaker. We started out as a rather rebellious group of people who often went to jail for what they believed, and for basically a horizontal society. We recognized the equality of the sexes immediately. That was one of the founding things. People are people. Men and women had no separation of power or authority. Women could speak, men could speak. Anybody could speak. There's the horizontal point. We, rather than using the term consensus, we used the word unity. We would for unity, and any one person could block an action for the group. A lot of people find that a difficult thing to do because we move really, really slowly when making decisions. But when we reach unity, we're strong in it. We refuse to, we started using thee and thou instead of you because thee and thou was the familiar term, and you was for somebody above you. You still find the remnants of that in other Romance languages like in Spanish and French. So for many years, Quakers used thee and thou when everybody else was using you, until it finally became just an affectation, and nobody used you to mean somebody better than you anyway. So we gave that up. But people were put in jail for refusing to speak respectfully to judges and magistrates, and especially priests and ministers in what was then the Anglican Church, which was, the Church of England, which was where we started causing trouble. Our founder, George Fox, is rumored, and I think there might be some documentation of this, but I don't know, to have, on occasion, he would frequently go to churches and argue with the preacher during the sermon. And on a couple occasions, he apparently took off all his clothes and marched down the aisle of the church to show, and this was back in the 1650s. I mean, you can imagine what it would be like today when you can see it on any television screen or computer, but this was a long time ago, and he just took off all his clothes and said, this is the plain truth. And he walked right, and of course that he got arrested quite frequently. But at any rate, that's some of the ways that Quakers and the Occupy movement are alike. And it's one of the reasons why I find a lot of hope in this movement, and why I feel a connection to it and a curiosity, and I want to watch it and see it grow, and why I think it's terribly important to affirm the continued nonviolence response to authorities, because they are not trained to handle that. They don't know. There's nothing in the police training. There's nothing in their handbooks, in their classrooms. They don't know what to do when they're loved. They don't know what to do. And we saw that with the hippies back in the 60s and 70s. The guys with the guns didn't know what to do when somebody handed them a flower. They just didn't know how to respond. Unfortunately, they often move into violence because they don't know what else to do. And so long as we don't resort to that, we have the upper hand. And we will always have the upper hand when we do it that way. And I think I've gone on way past 10 minutes.
I actually, no, you did fine. I did want to say that
Just
I
under,
will give
actually.
you guys a 2-minute warning when your time is up, but you did just perfectly. Thank you.
Wow.
So, call it. Who are we having next? Let's introduce Chava. Is that okay? Let's introduce Chava, who's joined us later. Again, the question is, talk about your spiritual grounding in your particular social action, talk about the social action, and then I told everybody there was kind of a hidden purpose here in asking the people here, because the particular panelists here, because I have a suspicion that maybe not 100%, but a whole lot, the particular traditions that you are in relate pretty well to this big, global, horizontal, leaderless, not top-down type of movement, and so if you can speak to that too. So everyone, welcome Chava Redonnet.
Well, the first thing I probably should tell you is that I'm a Catholic priest, but I'm a Catholic priest in very bad standing because Catholics don't have women priests, so getting ordained came with automatic excommunication. And I'm part of a movement of women I'm part of a couple of movements. I'm part of the Catholic Worker Movement, and that's where I serve as chaplain. I'm also part of a movement called Roman Catholic Women Priests. And one of the things that attracted me to this movement was that they're real clear that if we just plug women into the Roman Catholic hierarchy as it is, we're just going to become part of the problem. We need to also be asking, how do we become a church of equals? And what's the role of a leader within a church of equals? And that's my question. So this very much attracted me to this group. But being a woman priest, I'm on the outside, and it's up to me to pretty much create my own ministry. And I have a little church. It's called Oscar Romero Church. We meet in the dining room at the Catholic Worker. And we have a Spanish iteration called Iglesia de San Romero, which meets out west of the city once a week with a group of migrant workers. I don't know how much people have of Christian tradition, and I don't want to give a whole lecture on social justice and the church. But for me, if you've missed the social justice message of the scriptures, you've missed the message of the scriptures. It's really clear over and over and over again, especially in the prophets. It's not about worship, and then go home and feel good. It's always feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, give drink to the thirsty, heal the sick, over and over and over and over again. And as a matter of fact, Jesus said, the only time that Jesus ever talked about judgment, about what happens at the end, it wasn't about dogma. It wasn't this is what you must believe. It was how did you treat each other? Did you feed each other? Did you recognize that we're all one? And that if anybody's hurting, we're all hurting, and we need to all be taking care of each other. Well, Oscar Romero, that we named our church after, does everybody know who Oscar Romero was? Yeah. He was an archbishop in El Salvador who was assassinated in 1980 for standing with the people of his country. He was a voice for the very poor people at a time when they did not have a voice. And he was assassinated for that. He quite literally gave his life for his people. And Romero said, well, he said a lot of things, but one of the things he said that's really a guiding thing for me is that the church that does not unite itself with the poor in order to denounce from the place of the poor the injustice that is committed against them cannot call itself the Church of Jesus Christ. And I'm real clear about that. He also said that when you do that, when you stand with the poor and become one with them, you're going to suffer the same fate that they do. And he did. In his country, that meant dying. Here, it doesn't mean that at this time, but it does mean, well, I'll tell you some of the things that means in a minute. My little church has a mission out west of the city where we bring Mass in Spanish to a group of migrant workers once a week. It began this past summer as we just went out. I have a friend who's bilingual and who knows folks out there, and we just went out until somebody said, yeah, you can come have Mass here. And we started celebrating Mass in their driveway every week. And my Spanish is not perfect by any means, but it's good enough to say Mass and to preach and to begin to connect with people. And over the summer, we just built community. We shared cookies and where are you from and how long is it since you've seen your kids, and didn't ask a lot of questions. I never asked if people were here legally or not, because that's not really a polite question to ask. But in September, two of our guys did get taken by La Migra, by immigration, and ended up in detention. It was a really awful time. Nobody knew what was going to happen. I was able to bail them out. And since then, we have discovered that there's this thing called the Alternatives to Detention program that I had never heard of, where people wear a GPS ankle bracelet, and you can't wear winter boots over this thing, and you have to be plugged into the wall for 3 hours a day to charge it. I mean, it's insane, and this is farm workers. I mean, how dangerous is it to have this thing around your ankle? But because I was able to say I'm their pastor and the church is going to pay for a landline phone, they were able to use this alternative program where instead of wearing the bracelet, they sit by the phone for 2 hours once a week and wait for a phone call, and when it comes they have 3 minutes to answer, and if they don't answer within 10 minutes they get reported to immigration. They also have to report in to Buffalo every other week until they see the judge, which won't be until 2013. So every other Tuesday, we're driving to Buffalo. So the grounding of spirituality in that is, well, first of all, there's something that Gustavo Gutierrez said in his book, A Theology of Liberation. He said that in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan was the person who went out of his way to make someone his neighbor. And I find that that's really kicked me into going out of my way into places that I was uncomfortable, and sent me to El Salvador, and sent me out west of the city to become neighbors with people that my path would not ordinarily cross with. And then simply to recognize that we're all equals, and to speak to people with respect and with dignity, and to go to the trouble of learning their language so we can communicate and to stretch. And at first we're just being about building community at first. And then it got deeper when they got into trouble, and it became setting the captives free. That's one of those things that's in there over and over again. Visit the prisoner and set the captives free. Actually, when I went to the detention center, the man at the desk, they put the friendliest guy there at the main desk. And I recognized him, and he recognized me. I said, "Yeah, you remember me? I was here yesterday." He said, "Yeah, you're back." I said, "Yeah, I'm back with bail for 2 guys. And he said, 2 guys? Wow, must be something going on." I said, "Yeah, I'm their pastor. I'm here to bail them out." And he turns to the guy next to him and he goes, "She gets it." I said, what do I get?" He said, "This church stuff." And I said, "Yeah, set the captives free. That's what it's all about." Silence. Silence. But we did set them free, and now we're walking with them. Now it's about accompaniment. It's about we can't necessarily change everything, but we can be with them while they go through it, and that's what it's about right now. And that's where when Oscar Romero said that we're going to suffer like they do. Well, now I worry. Let me tell you, I worry about people getting picked up. I share in that. I don't have to worry about me getting picked up, but I have to worry about them. And we're sharing in the tediousness of driving back and forth to Buffalo every week. And because we're sharing it, or every other week, because we're sharing it, it's fun. It's a good time. I think that's one of the things spirituality is also about, is laughter and connection and joy and all those good things. So it's all there. It's all there. And I probably could talk for hours, because this is my life.
You've got another moment. Do you want to talk about the horizontalism, I know, of the Catholic worker, and the anti-authoritarian aspect of the Catholic worker?
I've been part of the Catholic worker since 1987. And we went to a directorless model a few years ago, so that it's the community that runs everything and makes decisions together. When we have our meetings, we rotate the chair. If you take the minutes this month, then next month you chair the meeting. That's one of the simple ways that we do things. There isn't one person that's in charge. We try to hear all the voices. We try to recognize that somebody that just joined the community might have wisdom that we all need to hear, and try not to do, well, hey, we've all been here for 30 years and you don't get to have a voice, but instead to hear the voices of everybody. I think the reason it works is we've got some fantastic people who are really committed to just that vision, and who perpetuate it and pass it on. I do think that at this moment in history, we've got a time when the people who came of age in the 60s and 70s are graying and are passing the baton on to the next generation. And we're seeing fantastic young people come through, and that's what I see the Occupy movement is being about too. This is a young movement, and it's just such a thrill to see it. I'm real grateful to all of you for being here.
Wonderful. We can talk more in the comments. Alex Camardo, tell us about your spiritual grounding, your faith, and your social action.
Okay, well, to borrow a statement from another tradition, I firmly believe that faith without works is dead. as a Zen Buddhist in the Mahayana branch, every morning and every night after meditation, we chant the 4 Bodhisattva vows, the first of which being, all beings without number, I vow to liberate. And, we do this over and over and over and over again. And, I've never been an activist because every time that I started to look at what was going on in the world, I would get very angry, and I would always say things like, if it wasn't for Zen Buddhism, I'd be one of these guys running down the street with a black mask over my face and a Molotov cocktail in my hands. And I really believe that probably would have happened. So when I started to see reports of a fairly large protest happening in New York City, and then on the other hand seeing that for several weeks in a row it was mentioned once in the mainstream media, it grabbed my attention. I said what's going on here? And when other occupations started to spring up in other cities, it really grabbed me. And I'm a resident at the Rochester Zen Center. I live there full time, and I grabbed a couple of other residents and suggested that we go down to the Liberty Pole and just meditate and just be down there and bring our presence down there. Buddhism has a fairly long history. Well, I guess it's all relative, but a slightly long history in social activism going back to the 60s. Robert Aitken Roshi, who passed away recently, who taught Zen in Hawaii, helped to start the Buddhist Peace Fellowship during that time, and he was pretty much an avowed anarchist his entire life. And back then, those kind of radical sentiments were part of Buddhist activism. When I got into Buddhism and I started checking out the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, it seemed that most of their action revolved around sending money to other places in the world where it's needed. These issues were real in Burma and Tibet, and I fully support it. But I wasn't seeing much in the way of social justice action here, other than kind of like paying lip service to the mainstream left-wing movement. So Buddhists believe that all human suffering is caused by what we call the 3 poisons. And the 3 poisons are greed, anger, and ignorance. And just very briefly, I'm going to talk about them. And how they're institutionalized, and a couple of just examples, things that popped into my head. For someone who meditates every day, my thoughts are very scattered about this whole thing, and I was very unclear about what this was actually going to look like. So just bear with me. Greed, selfish desire, grasping, craving, attachment. This sort of thing that we humans have that we never have enough. I don't have to tell a bunch of activists that greed has become institutionalized and taken on a life of its own. Not only does greed reside in the human heart, in my own heart, but now we have corporations who, even if the CEO was suddenly this extremely altruistic person, the systems that are in place are designed to just keep sucking in money. So it takes on a life of its own, becomes institutionalized. Greed, we see this institutionalized in things like Black Friday, where you have people acting in animalistic fashions to get their hands on a television. Traditionally, there are antidotes to these sort of things. Obviously, generosity is an antidote to this sort of thing. Contemplation of impermanence, the things that we grasp for that we think are going to make us happy are going to disintegrate and go away. That's an absolute sort of thing. I also made little notes here, like things in the Occupy movement for these three that just kind of pops up in my head. Occupations themselves can manifest greed when one political group tries to claim the Occupy message for its own. Occupy such and such is an anarchist movement. Occupy such and such is socialism, etc. Anger, institutionalized in militarism. The military-industrial complex takes on a life of its own. This is, connected to greed. Greed, anger, and delusion are interconnected and kind of feed off of each other. Keeping the wheel sort of rolling and keeping people in bondage. When we were on the sidewalk protesting and we weren't allowed to be in this park, I remember seeing sidewalk chalks. This message was scrawled on the sidewalk. It said, and it's common, I think, in the Occupy thing. It said, "If you're not angry, you're not paying attention." And I said, it doesn't make sense to me, because I think that if you're angry, you're not paying attention. You become incapable of paying attention. You're swept away by this. So when I'm marching up and down the sidewalk, holding a sign that says whatever, I really make an effort to try and do it with a joyful mind, and not to carry around this anger toward the proverbial 1% or whatever it is. Let's see here. Ignorance being fundamentally the split 2-minute warning between self and other, subject, object, etc. This is the one that really made me think about what's going on with this thing. Absolute opinions can be delusion. Like the discussion, the police are the 99% versus the police are the enemy. The police are the 99% when they're working with us. The police are, not our friends when they're tear gassing us, etc., etc. So, to go to the secret question again about how horizontalism figures into the Buddhist tradition. Traditionally, Zen Buddhism in Japan has more of a history of being with the sort of, fascist imperial element during World War II. There's a long history of that, about how the Zen Buddhist establishment supported militarism and used Buddhist philosophy to justify getting into a plane and flying into aircraft carriers and things of that nature, and torture and all kinds of horrible things. And it was done in China by the Japanese, using this sort of absolute perspective to justify all kind of genocidal stuff. I'm happy to report that as Buddhism made its sort of trek over to the West, that's starting to change. Buddhist centers now here, the Zen Center here, for instance, operates on a model where we have a board of trustees. I wouldn't say we have anything close to a consensus model like we do here, but it's run very democratically. There's a grievance process set in stone, even if the spiritual director, if somebody has a problem with something that he's done, there's a process to approach that. That's unheard of in Japan. That's unheard of in traditional countries, and I think it's starting to travel back there as well. And just to finish up, we had a really long day of ceremonies and things this weekend on Sunday, and then suddenly a Sangha member suddenly died, and we had to find a way to slip a memorial service in there. And Roshi came in and he started asking us how we'd like to make the day happen, he took suggestions from various people, and at the end everybody agreed, and he said, well, it looks like we have consensus. And this was an organic thing. He's been paying attention to all this stuff, and he's kind of like a secret supporter, maybe, who knows. But the words, well, it looks like we have consensus, came out of his mouth, and I said, yeah. So the last thing I want to say is that I've long felt that this Occupy thing goes way deeper than politics, economics, any of these individual issues, any of our so-called demands, or what this is about. I think this goes a lot deeper, and I think it's going to continue to deepen as time goes on. That's all.
Thank you. Michael.
I'm Michael Steinberg. I consider myself a Hindu, which is probably one of the most hierarchical traditions there is. It comes from a country that hierarchy is extremely important. And it's often been said by less than sympathetic observers that there is no ethical content to Hinduism whatsoever. On the other hand, the very idea of Hinduism is a pretty contested field. It's probably a European construction. There are arguments over whether there is one thing which could be called Hinduism, or whether there are three, or whether the concept of religion even applies to it. And the particular tradition that I belong to, for the past 3 years I've been an initiate in the South Indian tantric tradition of Sri Vidya, or auspicious wisdom, is one which in the Rochester area is practiced in a surprisingly egalitarian, caste-neutral, gender-neutral way, although our guru Aya is still the one who makes the decisions. On the other hand, I think if you think about how, especially the goddess tradition in India can work, especially in the tantric tradition, which is mine, I think there are some really extraordinary parallels with what's going on here. And I want to talk a bit about that because Indian religion doesn't operate the way religions do in the West most of the time. Our tradition is an extremely complex and subtle and ancient one, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to tell you a story instead. Once long ago, there was an asura, a particularly powerful, rather moral-free character named Mahisa. Mahishasura was able to be both a water buffalo and a person, and he had, through various means, acquired so much power that he'd thrown the gods over. He was taking all the sacrifices and he was running the universe. This, of course, displeased the gods, all of whom found that they were unable to do anything against him. So they got together, and from each of them, their tejas, this sort of strength or heat, came out and fused in the center in a sort of Marvel Comics kind of way, and from it emerged a woman of extraordinary beauty with 10 arms, riding on a lion. Actually, the lion was given to her to the gods. The gods immediately acclaimed her, and they gave her, each one gave her a copy of his weapon. And Vishnu gave a discus to her, and Shiva gave a trident to her. And she goes off, and she kills Mahishasura, and everything is fine. And the gods all say, how could we possibly worship you? You are before all of us. You are everything. You are beyond our comprehension. And you are present in all women. You are present in all consciousness. You're present in all illusion, and you're the way out of the illusion. If you look at the story in a sort of literal way, it sounds like another example of the colonial idea that these Indians are incapable of logic. Because after all, the goddess, who in this form is Durga is created by the gods, but yet the gods say that their creation is somehow much more than any of them. In fact, the Indian tradition is extremely logical. It just doesn't always start with the same logical premises, that that the Greeks did. The goddess in our tradition is everything. Everything is her manifestation to herself. I mean, I am the goddess, and those dead leaves are the goddess, and the laptop is the goddess. I mean, Indians have this wonderful tradition of worshiping their books on one day of a year, and so on. And when the gods let go of their ability to do anything about Mahishasura, and they fuse their energy, what that is revealed to them is in fact their underlying nature. They really are the divine, as all of us really are the divine. And I think it's also important that the gods give Durga all of their weapons, because it's some martial tradition of imagery in India, and the weapons are the ways in which the gods affect things in the world. By the way, the gods are generally thought of as mortal. They're not absolute reality. Not even Durga is absolute reality. She's just a manifestation of it. But the thing is that once they act in common, once they give up their individual weapons and hand them over to the goddess who is all of them, at that point she can conquer the demon and restore order to the world and receive everybody's praise. The tantric tradition, which is always misunderstood, almost always misunderstood in the West. And if you think tantra, and everybody thinks sex. And you know, like there is that content to it, but the desire that tantra is about is much broader. It encompasses sexual desire. It encompasses the initial throbbing desire out of which the universe comes into being from it not having been in being. But Tantra is largely about coming to experience the identity of all individual things with the divine, or if you will, with this incomprehensible process that is the manifestation of itself to itself, or herself to herself. And this has some interesting parallels, I think, with the Quaker notion of the inner light. And it has some really direct parallels, I think, with what's going on here. For one thing, nothing is apart from it. I cannot say that you are the devil, that you are the 1%. Everything is a moment of the divine. And everything is an opportunity to realize that divinity in all of us and to realize our unity in that one process. And the other thing, and I think this is perhaps more important for the particular process that we've developed here, or that we are working on here, there's no way to stand apart from that. You cannot withdraw from it and frame it and turn it into rules. It has to be something that you appreciate in every moment of its flowering, so that the process of consensus building, which is a process of not warring ideas, but of listening to each other and adjusting and discovering from one another what it is that we share. That's very close to the way, if not identical with the way in which you have to deal with the world, in which you can't remove yourself, in which you can't look at it from the outside. The gods can't look at it from the outside, and we can't look at it from the outside. All that we can do is learn to experience it and be open to it. And I think in that, when I first heard about this movement emerging, I felt at once that this is where I needed to be, and that this is where the reality that I was practicing at the temple had some echo in what people were trying to do. And to me, that's the great promise of the Occupy movement. Because the world that we have is built on separation. It's built on division. And to build a world which starts from our unity and our search for unity is, to me, both the deepest politics and the deepest spirituality.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you. Let's take your questions now, please. I guess I'll stack.
I don't really have a question so much as a comment and perhaps an expansion a little bit on how I'm involved with. I've been practicing Buddhist for 30-something years. I have been a member of the Zen Center, but currently am involved with a group that is working in a Tibetan tradition, and tying in with what both of you said. One of the main emphasis of the group I'm involved with are two things, and that's how I find myself tying in with Occupy Rochester, in that there's the practice of something called bodhicitta, which bodhicitta in Zen. Bodhicitta is basically approaching the world with an open heart, and the other thing is the idea that everything that we perceive in the world is really just a concept created from within us, and that if we view everything as concepts and not reality, then what we see takes on a whole other way of viewing it. And so, for instance, we look at a flower and we say, and our concept of flower is that a flower is something of beauty, and then we look at somebody living in the part of town that most of us don't drive in, because our conception is that is ugly and horrible. And so if we take away those concepts and we open up our hearts to everything, then it completely changes how we're willing to view and work with the world. And that's what I see in my involvement here. And in the consensus process, that if you're willing to listen to everybody, because without putting your own personal concepts in there as you listen, then you're going to learn more, and you're going to make the process of decision making a lot easier for everybody. So that's how my Buddhist practice also comes in. One other thing was, when I did spend, as one of the 48 who were arrested, I got to spend about an hour and a half or 2 hours with a group of 7 women who were waiting to be arraigned at the same time as we were, the 6 of us. And my initial response to them was a little bit, I was uncomfortable. I was maybe a little bit afraid, although only within the context, because I did know we were safe. But these were women who were very different than the world I grew up in. And so that was my first response. My first response was, hey, if I had to spend some time in jail, I don't know how I would feel with being in here with these women. And then I thought, wait a second, stop that, and remember I am going to now relax and just open up my heart. I am going to accept that all these women are here with me, and we're here together, and I want to hear what they have to say. And we started a dialogue in that space that was really wonderful. And by the time I left, we were all cheering each other on, and so I want to be in the place where I could cheer everybody on, even if maybe we're not coming from the same place. And that's where I really find a lot of my practices come into play.
I'll make a quick comment. I was supposed to be a stand-in if we didn't flesh out the panel, and I'm just very pragmatic, and the religion kind of is, and the spiritual grounding piece and social action really has to do with wanting to do community organizing, do organizing for social justice, work on social justice full-time if I could. And I'm like, all right, but I'm going to need some backup here, because people aren't always happy when you're sort of stepping up to the line like that and contesting the status quo. And so it's like, okay, I did grow up in this church that had people martyred in the civil rights era when I was a young person, who almost had Richard Nixon shut them down for their publishing house publishing the Pentagon Papers. I mean, that's a pretty good that's a pretty good pedigree. And I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and you know, true to form, I was just very, very happy. Really, even before, you know, the news blackout, brownout had ended, Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, all of the major denominations have an office at the United Nations, you know, the Presbyterians and so forth. And so their service committees, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee came out right away and said, Occupy, get on that, Unitarians. And then the head of the denomination, which I'll explain that thing in a minute, you know, the president, Morales, just came right out and said, okay, just go for it, just get in there. And I was just so happy. 100% support. Giant posse, 1,000 churches. It's not the biggest denomination, but that's a lot of people to back you up. And absolutely they have. I mean, they do have their processes. They don't move as quickly as we do, but the Universalist Church here and all of the churches around Rochester, they just started talking about it right away. You know, they have to get through their committee process and so forth, but we'll see the fruits of that very soon. And the church I'm attending now in Albion even had their own 2 people Occupy. They just spontaneously decided, and one woman in the congregation was so excited that she was even talking. She just kept breaking out talking during the service when she made, you know, so, she's like, oh yes, and she's the piano player. She's like, oh yes, I can do this, and oh, we can do that, and everybody was just really, really, really happy with her and happy with her excitement. And we were, you know, out on the sidewalk for this little Occupy, and another small town around here, Canandaigua, had a 1-day solidarity event. They sponsored it. It was supposed to be for the whole community. Very well attended, I understand. So the spiritual grounding is very pragmatic for me, in that there are people who get it in the church pretty much automatically. I mean, there are variations of opinion about how to go about things, but everybody knows the recent history of the church's social action if they attend the church, and the dialogue just sort of starts here instead of down here. It starts here with no explanations required, hit the ground running, and just, you know, absolutely go for it. The church itself, I'll just finish up, you know, they don't enact this horizontal, you know, consensus process perfectly or exactly the way we do, but there are some very important elements that just told me right away this is fine, and that you know, Occupy and the model that it chooses to use is really sort of a vindication of that. The churches have what's called congregational polity, which means every single church determines what they're going to do, how they're going to do church, and what it's going to be like when you attend there. Some are fellowships without a leaderless congregation. Others have, you know, professional ministry because they want somebody trained in pastoral care and how to, you know, present, you know, a church ritual and so forth. But they all decide. Every single church you go to is going to be different. So if you didn't like this one, go to another one. And then a really, really interesting thing, which I think really sort of, that's writ large, writ small inside of each church. What you will find is a group of people who have, if there are 30 people, 1,000 people in a church, there's about that many over on Winton Road, it's a really big church, you can have that as many individual beliefs going on in that church. There are Christians, earth-based worship or pagan, monotheists, humanists, which is religious humanists, which is my tradition. So I think, you know, that sort of model that all of those people with all of those different beliefs in a really large way, you know, we're in Canada and Europe and so forth, can do worship and do social action and all the things that churches do, but have all these different beliefs, yet do it together, really speaks to the hope that this can work, because I've really seen it work very well, you know, my entire life, you know, in other places. So, you know, I have, you know, about the most I can say is that, I mean, at least for me, is that a lot of the churches will, you know, they don't have a particular creed, nothing that you have to swear to, but they may come up with a prayer or something that they will say in common, maybe in every service, not all of them do. And, you know, the Universalist one that says, love is the doctrine of this church and service is its prayer. Well, service is my prayer.
Eugene College. It says Eugene College on it. It's getting towed.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good enough break, getting towed. So, any other comments, questions, concerns?
Thanks for listening.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Blue Volvo it is.
Any other comments? Oh, do you have a comment? Nope. No
Just
comments?
saying hi.
Just twinkling.
I guess you can turn them on.